A narcissist doesn't miss you when you still love them. They don't feel the loss while you're still holding on with hope. And they certainly don't feel regret while you're still crying, still explaining, still trying to save a relationship that's already decaying. Your care, even if it comes from genuine love, doesn't touch their heart. On the contrary, it reassures them that they still have control over you, that they're still the center of your emotional world, that they still get to decide when you're loved and when you're abandoned. And then, one day, everything changes. No more long messages, no more justification, no more pleading or emotional outbursts, only silence. But it's not a passive silence, it's sharp, like a declaration, a quiet truth that you're no longer there to serve as a mirror for their ego. And it's in that very moment that the narcissist starts to panic. You see, they don't miss you like a lost lover. They miss the power they had when you still cared. They miss being the center of the universe in your eyes. They miss the way you used to put them above yourself. But now that you don't react, don't reach out, and no longer need their validation, that's when they finally feel the loss. And that loss doesn't come from the heart, it comes from a collapsing ego. In today's video, we'll peel back the layers of this complex psychology to understand why a narcissist only truly misses you when you're no longer there, and why the one thing that confuses, haunts, and even hurts them isn't the love you once gave, but the indifference you now show. A narcissist lives through the reflections of others. They don't have a stable sense of self to define who they are, so they rely on emotions, attention, and especially your emotional investment to determine their worth. As long as you still love, still care, still get angry, still feel hurt, you are still a source of supply. Every time you react, even negatively, it confirms one thing for them. They still exist in your mind. And to them, that's power. So when you cry, explain yourself, send hundreds of messages, or come back after being hurt, they don't feel remorse. They don't wake up. They feel validated. They think, I still have an impact. I still matter. I can still control their emotions. That's why you must never confuse being hurt with being lost. A narcissist doesn't truly lose you while you're still emotionally attached. They only fear losing you the moment they sense you no longer need them. That's the turning point. That's when control starts slipping from their hands. That's when they begin to miss you. Not as a person, but as the role you used to play in their script. Pay close attention. When you pull back, when you become calm, when you stop explaining, the narcissist suddenly becomes uneasy. They might send probing messages, or worse, use others to send indirect signals, but all of it stems from a deep fear. You've changed roles. From someone they believed would always come back, you've become someone they can no longer predict. And that's terrifying for a narcissist, because they don't know how to love in a healthy way. They only know how to control other people's emotions in order to feel safe. So when you stop reacting, stop needing them, their world begins to crack. The mirror that once reflected their false sense of specialness now lies shattered, and they're left to face what they fear most, the emptiness within themselves. And in that moment, they're not missing the beautiful memories. They're missing the feeling of power they had when you were still vulnerable. And that longing, at its core, is an obsession over losing the only place that ever propped up their hollow ego. And when you stop texting, stop arguing, stop crying, the narcissist doesn't see it as your emotional growth. At first, what they see is the threat of losing control. They've grown accustomed to your reactions, the pleading, the explanations, the anger. Those emotions used to keep you tied to them. And at the same time, they served as food for their ego. So, when you choose silence, not because you're indifferent, but because you've matured emotionally, you're not just walking away from the narcissist. You're walking away from the game they used to dominate. And that's what terrifies them. They go back to their old tactics, playing the victim, posting happy photos, even acting like you never existed. But this time, none of it works. There's no reaction. No one is crying and coming back. No one's left to prove they're special. And slowly, the truth starts to sink in. The person who once reflected back their sense of power is gone, not because they were broken, but because they woke up. This is when they begin to truly feel the loss, not because they loved you in the way you once hoped, but because you were the only one who saw who they were and still tried to love them, the only one who forgave them far more than they deserved, the only one who stayed even after they pushed you away over and over again. And now you are silent, not because you're waiting, but because you've let go. You don't need to explain anything. You don't need anyone to validate your side. You don't need an apology to be at peace. That silence holds unexpected power, not because it's repressed anger, but because it's the peace that comes from emotional freedom. The narcissist feels that shift, and to them it's threatening. It shows that they no longer occupy space in your emotional world. It shows you've seen the pattern and you're no longer falling for it. And that, to a narcissist, is a devastating reversal of control. They used to run the story. Now, you decide the distance. They used to choose when to break up or make up. Now, you choose to stop playing altogether. And when you walk away, not with bitterness, but with clarity, you don't need to win because you already have. All of the things a narcissist will never admit, but always fears, is the terrifying sense of having nothing inside. They live off reactions, attention, and the emotional energy of others. They lack a stable sense of self to define who they are. They are a series of reflections, a mirror that needs someone else to look into it in order to feel real. And you, the one who once loved them sincerely, who patiently listened, who desperately tried to heal the relationship, you were one of the most important mirrors in their life, not because you were perfect, but because you were real. You felt deeply. You didn't love them because they were lovable, but because you saw the hidden wounds behind their mask, and you once believed your love could heal those wounds. But when you finally let go, when you stop reacting, stop enduring, and stop giving, they are suddenly forced to face the one thing they've always avoided. Who are they when there's no one left to control? At first, they try to replace you, a new relationship, someone easier to handle. They try to recapture that old sense of power through new faces, through familiar scripts. But slowly they realize no one reflects back to them a beautiful image the way you once did. No one waits patiently for them to grow. No one is deep enough to reach the part of them they always kept hidden. And then the terrifying truth begins to emerge. They don't miss you because you made them happy. They miss you because you made them feel like they mattered. When you disappeared, that sense of worth vanished with you. No one else believes in the better version of themselves that they had once tried to project. And with no one left to reflect it, they're forced to look inward. But what's inside? Simply, they once used you like a painkiller, and now the medicine is gone. They see wounds that were never truly healed. They see the hollowness behind every role they've ever played, and worst of all, they see you. Still standing, still at peace, even more radiant than ever. Without them, that is the most haunting moment for a narcissist, the moment they realize you no longer need them, not out of anger, not out of bitterness, but because you've outgrown them. When you walk out of a narcissist's life, you're not just leaving a relationship, you're taking away the mirror that once helped them believe they were okay, and without you, they lose the only anchor that ever gave them a sense of worth. This creates a nameless void, a kind of emptiness that can't be filled with material things, compliments, or new relationships. Instead of seeing it as an opportunity for growth, the narcissist does the opposite. They start watching you, secretly, obsessively, restlessly. They check your social media, ask mutual friends about you, search for signs that you're suffering or regretting your choice, but when all they see is light, your healing, your genuine peace that doesn't need to be performed, envy rises in them like a dark flame. Envy, for a narcissist, isn't just wanting what someone else has. It's a deep existential threat when someone possesses something they can't even pretend to have. Inner peace. They can mimic success, copy confidence, fake happiness, but peace, the kind that doesn't rely on being seen or praised, is something they can't imitate because it comes from within, and inside them is emptiness. When they see you thriving without them, they don't just feel replaced, they feel irrelevant. And for an ego that survives on the illusion of power, that's a devastating blow. They start asking themselves, how did she/he move on so fast? Why aren't they hurting like I imagined? Was I ever really important to them? These questions don't come from love. They come from a bruised ego. They'll try to compensate, posting happy photos, showing off new relationships, announcing sudden successes. But no matter how dazzling it all looks on the outside, inside, they can't escape the terrifying truth. You've found something they can't have and can't control. True freedom, and that's what sends them spinning in toxic jealousy. They don't want you back to love you. They want you back to regain control, to prove they still have influence over you. But when you stay silent, don't react, don't look back, you do the one thing they fear most. You show them they've lost all control. That envy doesn't lead them to reflect or change, it leads them to blame. They blame you for changing, for being ungrateful, for being too cold. But the truth is, you haven't changed, you've grown, and they simply couldn't grow with you. Hence, a narcissist realizes that not only have you walked away, but you're not looking back. They enter a particularly dangerous phase, the rewriting of history. Unable to bear the truth that you've let go and moved on with strength, they begin to twist the story, not because truth matters, but because their ego cannot survive the feeling of defeat. They start telling others that they were the one who left you, that you were unstable, overly sensitive, controlling, or incapable of love. They create a version of you, distorted, unfamiliar, completely detached from the real person you once were. And worse, they tell it with such conviction that outsiders can't help but believe it. Why do they do this? Because to a narcissist, losing control isn't just about losing a relationship, it's an ego collapse. And instead of facing responsibility, they take the easier path, blame. By rewriting the story, they get to maintain their role as the victim in the eyes of others while avoiding the internal shame they're too emotionally immature to confront. But what they don't expect is that some people see through it. People who know you, who've witnessed what you endured, who know the truth, doesn't align with the story being told. And even if they manage to fool a few at first, over time the cracks in their version begin to show. A narcissist can fake calm, build an entire persona around being the perfect victim, but they can't sustain consistency in a story that isn't rooted in truth. Eventually, the inconsistencies start surfacing through behavior, words, or sudden outbursts that don't quite match the script. The truth, like an underground spring, always finds its way to the surface. Meanwhile, you, the one who walked away quietly, without explanation, keep living, keep growing, and continue being recognized by the right people for your true worth. Not because of some performance, but because of how you exist. No theatrics, no stage needed. Just a presence that is real, peaceful, and doesn't need to prove anything. And then the narcissist comes to realize something they can't undo. You didn't just escape them. You escaped the story they tried to trap you in. Because real growth, unlike performance, carries a quiet but undeniable power. And because truth, no matter how deeply buried, always has one thing the narcissist can never control: time. Time does not stand with the manipulator. It stands with the one who chose to walk away in silence and live in alignment with who they truly are. After all the manipulation, the pretending, and the rewriting of history, the narcissist begins to feel something they were never emotionally prepared to face. You didn't just walk away, you truly closed the door. And when that becomes undeniable, their initial arrogance crumbles. The cold games fade, the perfect act falls apart. In its place, they reappear wearing a different face, softer, seemingly more remorseful, and sometimes offering a regret that sounds incredibly convincing. They might send a simple message like, "I miss you, just wanted to see if you're okay," or "I've been thinking a lot." These words can strike a chord in the emotional part of you that once loved them, the part that once forgave, once waited for change. But this time you are different, not because you've become cold or cruel, but because you've learned one of the most profound truths from your pain. Not every apology deserves to be accepted. Not everyone who returns deserves to be let back in. The narcissist isn't coming back because they love you. They're coming back because they've lost their mirror. They can't stand the feeling of invisibility, and they know that you, with your deep heart and genuine energy, were once the most potent emotional fix they ever had. Their return isn't repentance. It's a desperate attempt to pull you back into the cycle you fought so hard to escape. But what they don't realize is that this time their return means nothing, because you're no longer the same person. You no longer feel the need to play the healer. You don't have to prove your kindness. You're not waiting for validation from someone who was never capable of truly seeing your worth. Through the pain, you found yourself after being twisted by their manipulation. And now, as they knock on your heart again, you realize it's no longer a home for them. For a narcissist, this is the most earth-shattering moment, because they once believed you would always react, always soften, always let them back in, even if just one last time. But this time, when they try, the door remains silent. No anger, no hatred, just absence. That breaks them faster than any punishment ever could, because the most painful truth for a narcissist isn't being hated, it's being forgotten. It's losing total control and being shut out from the world of someone they now know they will never have again. At some point, the narcissist is forced to accept the one thing they once thought impossible. You're no longer there, no longer within reach, no longer the mirror that reflects their distorted ego. And this doesn't just make them lose control, it makes them lose direction, because all their life they've lived through others. They defined themselves by the power they could manipulate, the attention they could attract, and the emotions they could control. When you stepped out of that cycle, you took away the most important thing they would never admit they needed, the false version of themselves. Now, no one believes the performance anymore. They start to realize that no amount of slander can erase the real memories people have of you. They begin to see that you didn't just survive after leaving, you're now more radiant, more awake, and more free than ever before. And that is the truth the narcissist cannot bear. You are living in truth, without their validation, without their reaction, without any of their fake apologies. You're not seeking closure from them because you already closed that door with clarity and self-respect. You don't need them to admit they were wrong in order to heal. You've already healed. And while they remain trapped in cycles of lies, roles, and manipulation, you've crossed into a new threshold, a space where no one can reach you unless they come with honesty, maturity, and genuine kindness. The narcissist may continue talking about you behind your back. They may paint stories, twist facts, even create a version of you that is crazy, too sensitive, or ungrateful. But the truth doesn't live in their words. It lives in the strength of your silence. Your silence is not weakness. It means you have nothing left to prove. Your leaving was not revenge. It was awakening. You are not the one who caused their pain. It was their unhealed ego that destroyed everything. You simply refuse to be part of the cycle anymore. This is the legacy you leave behind, a truth that cannot be denied, a quiet strength that doesn't need to shout, and a light they once tried to dim now shining brighter than ever. The narcissist may go on performing, repeating the same toxic patterns with someone new, but with you, that chapter is over. And it didn't end in destruction. It ended in growth. You are not the one who was left behind. You are the one who walked away and never looked back. You once loved them with your whole heart, not because they were perfect, but because you saw something deeper, a part of them they were too afraid to face. You stayed when every piece of logic told you to leave. You listened when they screamed through silence. And you gave, not just once, but again and again. And yet they chose deception over honesty, control over connection, performance over vulnerability. And eventually you came to understand a painful truth. Love, no matter how deep, can't save someone who doesn't want to save themselves. When you walked away, they thought you'd come back. They thought it was just another tactic. But as time passed, you didn't return. Not out of hatred, not to make them suffer, but because you woke up. You understood that sometimes true love isn't about holding on. It's about letting go, in silence, allowing the other person to finally face themselves. You understood that self-respect, peace, and truth are worth more than any illusion. And most of all, you understood that you deserve so much more. In your silence, you became a mirror to the truth they can no longer escape. In your silence, you left them alone with a void no new supply can ever fill. And in your silence, you walked away from the game. Not because you lost, but because you no longer needed to win a battle that was never real. So if today you still wonder, did they ever truly value me? Do they remember? Then remember this. They remember, they know, they can't forget. Because in their world of falsehood, you were the most real thing they ever encountered. But tragically, that truth only became clear to them after it was already gone. And you, the one they once called too much, now need no recognition, no apology, no validation, because you have reclaimed yourself. You weren't just the best thing they ever had. You're the best thing you ever chose to hold on to. Yourself. If you see yourself in this journey, don't forget to hit subscribe. You are not alone, and we'll continue this path together. Learning to live truthfully, to love healthily, and to move forward without looking back.